Innovative open source projects made by incredibly motivated students, coaches, and organizations.
Okay, so this talk is for both designers and developers, and I will just try to let you meet each other and get to know each other so you can work together great. So I'm going to start off with a quote. What's in development is what the user gets. The user will never see your pixel perfect designs in your design file. And that's a real shame. So don't make your design effort completely worthless. Because everything you did is really valuable, but it's not going to be shown into the development and the user will never see it if you don't really set up some ground rules and get your designs into development. Of course, the developers really appreciate your designs. I'm not doubting that, but you'll have to set up a good way of working together. So start with a good setup, and a good setup is all about using the right tools. Like we've talked before, we always mention Figma, and I'm also going to tell you why programs like Figma are the better design tools to use right now. Do bear in mind that this changes rapidly. Like if you would ask me 2 years ago which the best design tool was, in my opinion, then it was probably Sketch. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, it was probably Illustrator. So you'll see it evolves really quickly, but at this stage, I would say Figma. So use the right tools. What are the right tools and what do you need to look for when you're using tools? Things you need to look for are shared styles. That means that you have a definition of a color, gradient, shadows, opacity, blur, spacing rules, and typography in place. So this basically has to be supported so your developers can really find your ground rules of the design. I see that Jan replies in chat, I'm used to XD, but during this OSOC, I'm going to use Figma for the first time. Well, I'm going to definitely convince you already why you should use Figma. Is Illustrator still legal or not accepted anymore within the industries? Asks Finley. Well, you can use it because it's still vector-based, and I'll quickly move to the next frame. It's still vector-based, but do consider that it doesn't support any iterative design. So to just give files, I would say yes. To create a product, I would say no. That's quite a different thing. Is that clear in any way? I will try to elaborate on that a bit more when we're in the design file. Okay, perfect. So use the right tools, vector-based, definitely the second thing I mentioned. The reason Illustrator is still a bit better than Photoshop is because Photoshop is not always vector-based. It uses a lot of pixelated things. And especially when you come to the screens of today, which are 1, 2, 3x, it's really hard to get everything pixel-based implemented. So it's really not the way to go. It's not very adaptable either. And don't expect as a designer to see your design one-on-one in development when you're sending them PNGs, because there's nothing they can do with them. They cannot measure them, they cannot extract stuff from them, so it's never going to work for them. And that brings me to the next topic, measurement. Measurement is super important, and if you have a vector program, like Figma is, for instance, the developers will have the ability to measure things. And this has to be implemented in the tool as well. So they will be able to read your design and see all the different margins between everything without needing your notorious designer eye to do that. This designer eye will come back every single time. So developers, you'll get a little insight of what a designer eye is. Okay, so using the right tools, asset handover is a very important thing. And this is one of the things where you'll see that Illustrator doesn't really work. You'll have to export everything manually, and you'll have to make sure that everything reaches the developer. And if there's a little update on anything, you'll have to do it again and again and again. So it's really not the way to go. You'll have to have an asset handover tool. With Figma, the one on top, it's included already in the program itself. So a developer can just hop into your file, take whatever he needs, and leave the file again. It's as easy as that. There are tools who support this, the exporting as well. which is on screen, which is Zeppelin, for instance. Zeppelin is a program where you can export design files to, and from that program they can extract things. So I'm going to quickly show you how that works. So, for instance, this is what Zeppelin looks like. You can click on things and you can export via the right side over here, as you can see. Um, the problem with the tools like Zeppelin is basically that you'll always have to export and have the latest design right into Zeppelin. So anything you do in your design file is not up to date on Zeppelin, and that means you'll have double work to do. That's why I would say use Figma, because Figma has it implemented right at that spot. So if I change anything here and a developer will come in my file, it's already changed because they can literally enter your design file, and that's a better approach to it. Then you have like two approaches as well. One is you have on-screen delivery, which is basically what I just did in Zeppelin, is I click on the element in the screen and I download it from the screen. The problem here is that, first of all, you don't have an overview of all assets that are possibly there, like icons, like all the icons. And if you're looking for a certain icon that has been implemented in the previous screen, but you'll have to reuse it again now, there's no way of really finding out which screen that was, if you know what I mean. So there is a risk to on-screen delivery. I would prefer, or I would suggest you'd use a library for that. And that means that you collect every icon of the same thing on that second screen, like you see here below. It's an icon library, for instance. All right, moving on. The single source of truth is basically what I just tried to explain to you. This is an issue which nearly every program, XD, Illustrator, Sketch have, because there is no way you know what is the real design that's being implemented, because it can still be stuck in the designer's file and not be on Zeppelin, for instance. So be careful there. All right. So these are the 5 pointers you really have to look for when you're using a design tool. Is there any questions regarding design tools? I don't see any questions up here. All right, moving on. Don't think screen, think component. What does this mean? Components are basically interactive building blocks for creating an interface. So you really have to think Lego style here. Think of your interface as Lego blocks that you would use to build up things. This is something that a typing feature would be great. And definitely. But feel free to still post questions if you still have them. So basically, this is something the developers have been doing for ages, reusing stuff, because there's no fun in creating things over and over and over again. So this is a thing that designers really have to learn as well. And I will try to explain it to you by using sushi references. So we have atoms. Those are the really smallest part of your interface, like you see here. They're like the little ingredients you use in sushi. They can be implemented in any location, and they can be reused all over and over. So you have the second one, which is the molecule. And a molecule is basically a combination of multiple little atoms. So here you see the little ingredients are put together to little sushis. Then you have organisms, and that's basically a set of molecules. So that means that you have molecules which contain little atoms, but to put together. So that's an organism, it's a bit bigger than that. And you have templates, which is basically a set amount of molecules that is being repetitively used. I will try to explain it to you a bit more by using this video. As you can see, atoms are just buttons input fields. Once they're put together, they're a molecule. Once they're put together to, for instance, a header, they become an organism. And a template is basically a page that gets reused over and over and over again, but has different content in it. So that's when you get a template. So when you're designing something, really think this way, because a lot of things are being reused on different pages, and it will definitely help you create more consistency throughout your design. Now, components also work in Figma, and it's really easy to use. And when you're creating 1,000 screens, it will benefit you greatly. And I will show you now how to do it. All right. So here is my infamous application, Niels that I showed you yesterday, if you were at the talk. There is a lot of screens here, and I've already prepared a bit in my file. I see there's a question coming up from Les. So what are components? Are atoms and molecules, etc., all components? Yes, that's basically the component mindset. So all of these are components. Components are like little building blocks to create your interface. So both atoms and molecules, organisms, and templates are all components. So as you can see here, I removed the sushi reference a little bit for you to make it more clear. But like you can see, the atoms are basically everything that's singular and you cannot really chop up in more pieces. For instance, like buttons and imagery and stuff like that. The molecules are a combination of it. So you can see now you have text labels in different formats, and you have an icon together, which creates a header, and the header is a molecule. When a header gets combined with other entries, like other components, for instance, like the imagery here, you'll get a carousel or a swim lane, regarding to how you want to call it, and that is an organism. And if you have a homepage with multiple carousels underneath each other, like for instance Netflix does with their movies, you'll have a template because the carousels are repeating and this page can be used over and over and over again. I see Meet has also replied to it. This is sometimes different for development workflow and designer workflow. It's important you have a good understanding in your team what is what, so you can use the same lingo. Definitely, lingo is the most important thing to do. How important is naming vocabulary structure of components in collaborative context? Definitely. A question answered. Yeah, exactly. It's super important because you want to be talking about the same thing here. You don't want to be talking about that bubbly icon thingy. No, you really want to know, oh, it's that icon. Or you don't want to be talking about that the title thing above the movies. Well, that could be referencing to both this or this. So really naming is super, super important here. You have to be talking about the header of that carousel thing, for instance. So that can definitely help you here. Of course, these names are very simple because there is nothing else to this design. But in realistic way, you would have more elaborate names than just header because there will be multiple headers probably in there. So I hope that answers your question a little bit as well. All right, so the benefit of components in a design file are also present equally to how they work in developers' work, basically. So for instance, we have this carousel and I want to make this page from scratch now. I've already created this carousel, but now I want to create exactly the same carousel with the movies about Brussels section. So I have a duplicate of this component and I can really change parts of it. For instance, the title, so movies about Brussels. Good. Now, as you can see in the normal design in this, you would have covers, but I didn't have the time to add covers, so I just decided to use a different color. So what you can do here is you can really enter the component and you can change the colors by this way, as you can see. It's really easy to do, and then you have a different color section. Also, there is a difference in the icon usage that we have on here. So we want to change this icon. I've already predefined my icons over here, and I want to apply the movies about Brussels pin here. So I'm going to change the component to pin because now it's international, but I want it to be pin. And I want the color to be white. There we go. So Now we have the same component used for both of them. Now, you would be asking me what's so different about this approach than my usual approach. I don't see the benefit. Well, imagine you have made 1,000 screens like this for your client, and you've used that carousel over 200 times. Now imagine that your client's like, I actually wanted rounded corners. Do you feel the pain? You'll have to go through all your design files to get rounded corners on each and every component you just made. I think you're about to throw your computer out the window by now, no? Well, that's not the case when you're using components. So the really benefit is the client asks to adjust the corners of the carousel entries. So that means that we're looking at the movie tile. If we here change something, for instance, the rounded corners to a bit more rounded, you'll see that it applies everywhere instantly. So that's hours and days of work saved. And this is why you should use a program with components. And those are basically Sketch, Figma, and XD. There you go. Are there any questions towards components? Magic, yeah, definitely magic, Emily. I hope this will convince people to change from Illustrator to Figma now, because you're going to save so much time. I've been in that position before. Right, so we have our components set up, and this is really cool because we know how everything works. We know that there will be differences between the blue carousels and the orange carousels. We know everything, but how do you move now from this? How do you get this information to your developers? Because you know everything is in your head, but your developers will not know this by hand. We can use a component overview for this. And that basically means that we're creating an example file of how components are used. I've added an example that I've made myself for a project, which is about pins and pins dropping. And as you can see on the top row, I explained like these are the situations that the pin is going to be used in. So as you can see, there are multiple states, and in this case, there are 7 states, and they all look a bit different. What is important here to notice is that some colors do not have a white label text, but a dark label text, just because the contrast wasn't good. If you don't put this in an example, the developers will not know that they have to change the color of the text on certain other colors. So it's very important that you note this on a certain file. So an explanation here is very important. Next to that, you also have all the states that have to occur with the pin. For instance, you have a hover state, you have a press state, you have all these kind of states. You have to design them so the developers actually know what to do when there is a press state on a certain component. So if you put them on this component overview, they will know what to do with them. So I've already put them in there for all cases of this element. But not only interaction states are states that you need to cover. You have to really look at the bottom row here. And the bottom row shows, for instance, an error state when there is no Wi-Fi, or an error state when it's loading, or the edit state when you're moving it. Please also show all these types of elements on this overview. It will help your developer understanding the component very well. And one thing that we as designers usually don't really look at is fallbacks. And fallbacks is a very important thing here. As you can see on the right, this is an element that's being used by Colruyt in their My Colruyt app. And one of the things that happened here was they changed the copy of the initial design that I made. I only set tone extra or show extra, which was the label basically, and they changed it to tone extra and ontvang kortingen, which means show extra and receive discounts. So my label was already much longer than I wanted, but fine, my component could bear with that. That's not an issue. But then it got translated to French. And then the text became so long that it couldn't fit on one row. And if you don't design for these things, funky things will happen. Either there will be aberrations that you don't want there to be, or your text will have a weird interline, for instance, or well, those are probably the best cases still, but there will be a lot of things happening that you don't want there to happen. So really design for those things in advance, especially when you're using text. Make sure that you create a case for like the bounds on each side of the element and what happens when the text becomes longer or shorter. A very elaborate design that I made here is for a card I used in Colruyt itself as well. As you can see, I've added some examples for my developers, showing them where the break lines are of the element and how it should move when there's more text. So for instance, on the very first example, underneath examples, the text is shorter than I want the minimum width of the card to be. So then you'll see the minimum width is the most important. The second one shows you a label that's a bit longer, so it exceeds the minimum width of the card, but it doesn't reach the maximum width of the card either. So here it's very important that I've noted down the bounds of this element. And then you have what happens when it exceeds the maximum width of the element. And then you will see that I've asked the developers to move upwards the text thing, so the text thing according to the photograph. Which is also very important because the developers could have said maybe it will drop downwards like you see in the last one. So it's very important that you describe everything very concretely in advance. Of course, it's no shame if you didn't do this in advance, but as a developer, it's also your task to really um, discuss these things with your designers if you notice these kind of problems. So we can really work for a good solution and just don't implement anything by hand immediately. What is really cool with tools like Zeppelin or with Figma is that you can add comments as a developer. So if anything is unclear, tag your designer in their design so they will notice when they're running through the file. But do notify them as well via Discord, of course. All right, so centralized communication is very best used on the component overview because if it's stuck on one singular screen and the question is really about the component itself, then it might be stuck on that screen and information will be lost. While if you place it on the component overview, it will be gathered in the same space. All right, is that clear? I hope that was a bit clear. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll just wait like a couple of seconds. Very clear. Thank you, Tim. All right. I'm moving on. Clear, Finley. Awesome. Great. All right. I'm moving on to introducing the value concept. And this is basically something you have to agree upon. And I'm going to sketch a little situation here. Developers are being like nothing more frustrating than recreating the same element over and over and probably just like changing a little thing on that element because the designer wants that, you know? But designers are more like nothing more frustrating than the same element that looks differently on every page. I wanted them to be the same. These things you can easily avoid by creating a common understanding. So interfaces are really all about reusing elements. And we have done this and we've discussed this about how we do this in components. But things that are reused more and more and more oftenly than components are colors, iconography, typography, and grid systems. So we'll discuss them right now. So a value concept is really agreement between all the collaborators on the same project. And that means designers, developers, communication, everyone who's involved in this project should know about the value concepts. And those are really meant to create consistency and to create flexibility. And I will show you what that means. For instance, for colors, it's very important that you have a systemized color system. And naming is one of the key elements in that. What you could do, and what we do, for instance, is we name our elements towards their importance. So, for instance, we have the primary color, which is used throughoutly. We have a secondary color, which is used a bit less. And we have a tertiary color, which is used even less. So I might hear you thinking, why don't we just call them orange, green, and yellow, for instance, instead of primary, secondary, and tertiary, because I don't know what color that is. Well, you have a point there, but also consider these are the colors that are used by Colruyt, for instance, and Colruyt's brand is orange. And my main color is named primary 500 in this case, and that's the core of Colorado's color system. Now imagine we've created this application with 300 different screens, and it's used all over the same color. Good. Developers know this is orange in their development, and designers know it's orange as well. But now Colorado changes their brand identity to pink. You're stuck because all the naming everywhere is orange, and suddenly it's pink, and you have to update it everywhere. So see what the problem is with the naming if you use the literal color name. So it's much better to really use neutral naming like primary, secondary, tertiary, so you won't run into these problems when stuff changes. So be open for adaptation and create a good overview of the colors and their names. What we do at In the Pocket is basically we name shades towards a certain value. And we always start with 500 as the base color. Like you see here, primary 500 is the base color of Color. Lighter tones are going lower in value, and darker tones go higher in value. So this means that if I have a primary 400 or a primary 500, I know by hand the 400 is lighter than the 500. And this also means that if a designer is like, this tone should be a bit lighter, you just drop 100 in value and you have a lighter tone. It's as easy as that. You don't have to communicate more than that. While otherwise you'll have to look up the right name for the color, or really send another value for the color, and that is way less useful, of course. Now, how can you make such a color system? There is a tool called Colorbox, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of designers know a lot of tools as well. But I'm just going to really show you Colorbox, and it's made by the company Lyft, which is like an Uber Uber-like service in America usually. What you can do with Colorbox is basically say how many steps you want between two colors, and this can be a gradient style, like you can see here. So you can really make a shade that goes gradient style, but you can also stay within the same color. And then you can say, okay, I want the shades in the end to be more consistent, while the front is more prone to change, for instance. But you can also change a lot of things like brightness and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things you can do here to really create easily those steps from 100 to 900. So one thing that is missing from the systemized naming that I see right now is that for gray tones, for instance, which is primarily used throughout everything, we try to use the name neutral. So we have primary for the primary color, secondary for the secondary color, tertiary for the tertiary color, and neutral for all the gray tones. Neutral 0 being full white, neutral 999 being full black. Is there any questions towards the color names? If there's anything, if something you don't understand, let me know. I will try to elaborate on it a bit more. All right, so I will continue to distinguishing status colors. Status colors are different towards the regular colors like neutrals and primaries and secondaries, because status colors really have a function within the app which is less prone to change than the base color. Now, as you can see in Colored is a really good example for that. Their brand identity color is orange. And you could say, let's just use the primary 500 color for the error messages as well, and we're done. We don't really have to invent a new color, right? It's easy as that. But now think again about the rebrand phase. This would mean that every color that is assigned to your primary 500s changes when the rebrand to pink happens, for instance. And this means that your warnings messages will also turn pink. You don't want that to happen, of course. So it's better to really distinguish those status colors from your brand colors or your neutrals or your primaries. So what you can do here, which is a really good practice, is looking at error statements, warning statements, the success, and information. And you can really determine how they look and what color you want to give to them. You don't have to follow the rules, but these are the cognitive associations which are usually used to those messages. All right, that's everything for color. Moving on. Spacing. Spacing is a second agreement you really have to make, and spacing can be really easy. This is another way you can train your designer eye, really, as a developer and as a designer at the same time. What we usually do with in the pocket is we use multiples of 8, and multiples of 8 means that every padding or every margin between elements is a multiple of 8. So as you can see on the right side here, the distance between the label and the title is 8. This could be 16, this could be 24, and so on and so on. Of course, you'll notice that on some applications, like for instance, the icon distance towards the text, it's not possible to do that with 8. So you can introduce new value systems like 4 or 2, but really try to keep them as little as possible. What you want to do here and what your goal eventually is that if you mess up a little pixel in your pixel design and it becomes 7, your developers will automatically know it's supposed to be 8, and you have peace of mind because everything is nicely consistent. On the other hand, there's also the fact that the developer doesn't have to really measure every single thing. They can just look at your design at a certain point and have the designer mindset in there, like, I know this is 8. I don't have to measure everything. It's so much easier for both of you to work like that. All right. Next up, iconography. Iconography is a thing that is often reused in interfaces as well. And iconography is next to text definitely the first thing that comes to mind that changes everywhere. In my example in Figma, I also changed the icons. So as you can see, it happens really often. And what is very important here is that you have to make your icons so they are easily replaceable in different contexts. So what is really good is that you have the same thing that you have with the grid system or with the colors, is that you have a set amount of sizes that you use, and you name them accordingly to the size as well. So for instance, icon 16, and then the name of the icon could be a name that you would give to your icon. And that makes it for developers much easier to find the right icons at the right place. What is also really a tough one as a designer is that you have to fit icons within the same sizing. For instance, like the 24 ratio, the 24 by 24. And I've known that a lot of designers have struggled with this. The problem is suddenly you have an icon like the rocket here, which is much longer than the rest. And then you have a weird aspect ratio, for instance, 16 by 24. To avoid this, you'll always work on sort of grid system. And this is similar to how app icons, for instance, work. So if you want to know more about this, you can really look up how app icons work. So basically, you have a grid and a box with a no-go zone. Like as you can see here, the no-go zone is a sort of area around the box, which in your design has to fit. And it can adapt to your ratio. So this means, as you can see on the right side, if your rocket is higher, you will remove some space from the right side and make it longer, but it will still fit within the same square. And the same happens with the truck. So there, the space has become more lower, but there will be space used in the widthness, but they still are the same size in the end. So they have a little margin around them. So that's icons for you. Is everything clear about icons? Yes, awesome. Awesome sauce. All right. I'm almost to my end. No, I'm almost done. This is the last thing. So sorry for taking up a bit too much time there. So design reviews is the last things you really have to look at. And design reviews are basically, you sit together with your developer, you go through whatever has been developed, and you really look at what's good, what's not good, and learn from them. So you can really distinguish blockers from improvements, which means that when a thing is 1 pixel off, you might want to reconsider making a very high like bug ticket for it, for instance. Like really try to distinguish what is really necessary for the design and what can be taken on in a later phase. So you don't lose track of time by constantly adjusting design. But of course, the initial thought is you have respect for your designer, and the designer has respect for the developer in the sense that everything is following the agreements and is trying their best to get the design into development perfectly. All right. So this is everything that you can really agree upon, and I hope this would help you setting up your projects. And if you have any questions, please drop them into chat. I see Les is asking, if you are using Figma in your team, is there a way for the developer to see what has changed from the last time they visit Figma? That is a good question. And I honestly don't know that by hand, if I'm fair. Um, I assume there is a way. I think you can find it via the version history. Yes, you can see. I think the changes are made through browsing them, but I don't know if you can compare them. For instance, I would have to look that up. Does anyone else know that by any chance? I will try to come back to you on this, Les. If you can see what has been changed since the last version, meet. Because I know you can browse back to your other saves and you can really compare them visually, but I don't know if you can see the difference between what happened or not. I think not, says Meet. Yes, I'm afraid so as well. But it's really important that you, as a designer, if you change something, that you notify your developer of this. This is really on you. So if you don't change it as if you change it as a designer but don't tell your developer, how is he supposed to know? So it's a bit, you can make agreements on that one as well, of course. Anything else? I see Aurélie says, thanks a lot for someone who has very limited skills in design. It was very interesting and clear. Can't wait to put your tips into practice. Oh, that's very nice to hear. Thank you very much, Aurélie. I really hope it will help you setting up a good start for your project. All right. If you have any more questions in the end for me, you can ping me via Discord, and I will try to help you out as much as possible. All right. Thank you very much for listening, and have a nice lunch. Bye bye.